Good afternoon, everybody. When Maureen and I first met this summer, I was senior researcher at the CIPD, and this was the program that I was leading, the Contours of Organisational Fairness. It's a 3-year program that the CIPD is committed to look at the construct of fairness and how that operates within organisations. But since then, I've been given a shiny new title, and I now head up a new department called Insight in Futures. So for those of you who are CIPD members, just to give an idea of where the Institute is going, we were very conscious that we weren't actually providing a lot of inputs into our members who had strategic functions. And one of the things that was called out then was to build a capability to do horizon scanning. The things that are likely to shape the future of work, the kind of bumps and roadblocks that are going to happen in the labour market. And my job in doing Insight Futures, one is to build the Institute's capability in business analytics. The second part is to start a new program of futures research. But there is also another track that I'm kind of manning at the moment, and that's HR, international HR standards. You may or may not be aware of it, but under the International Standards Organization, there is now a move to codify 21 HR practices and procedures. And these will be then translated through national standards bodies and will affect the practice of HR quite dramatically in years to come. Okay, it will take probably 20 years for this work to be done. But as these standards are rolled out, you will find that the work that CIPD does could be erased quite dramatically because we will have to conform to what the multinationals want in those practices. To that end, the CIPD is now working with the British Standards Institute to develop a whole new set of British standards in reaction to this work, but also to make sure that the interests of British businesses in this field is clearly articulated. Now, this is the research active track of my life, so I'm going to share with you some of the findings from this report, which was, as Maureen said, just published last week. I have a few copies. I will distribute them later, but if you don't get the hard copy, it's freely available on our website. Just Google CIPD Contours of Fairness Research and you'll get straight to the report. Okay, this is what I'm trying to cover today. Now, what do these organizations have in common?
Cheat on their tax.
Sorry?
Cheat on their tax.
Okay, cheat on their tax. Does anybody remember anything about that debate about whether these corporations were doing the right thing in transferring their tax liabilities to Liechtenstein, Ireland, and other places?
Yeah.
Okay. How many of you think that was wrong? So half of you think that was right. That's really good. Okay, why? Why do you think it was right?
Well, whether it's morally right, it was legally right. And that's the issue at the moment. Whether it's morally right, I would say it's not morally right.
Okay. But you would argue that they had a leg to stand on because it was legally.
Law allowed them to do it.
Okay. No, that's a very thoughtful response because I would agree with you. They were completely compliant, and the reason why they could do that is because HMRC also plays that game. They also create tax holidays, they create tax loopholes deliberately to entice businesses to operate out of UK, including this government. They've made corporate tax effectively about 11% in the UK. So for these organizations, they're doing tax planning. They're fully compliant well within the law, and despite the rabble outside saying it is wrong, it is legally correct. I'm going to draw an analogy with HR practice. What do most HR practitioners attempt to do in terms of the process? They go for compliance. And what I'm going to argue today is that it isn't enough. It isn't enough anymore if you're doing strategic HR to talk about mere compliance. How many of you remember this episode? And it's a little bit old now, but do you remember the wonderful Guy Fawkes mask parading through our city? Now, how would you feel if outside your building it said job cuts equal executive bonuses? It's not very far-fetched. Now, the way that we've approached fairness is to look at it very, very broadly, because it is a term that is used very widely in the political, social, economic debates in this country. It is less so in the continent, where the construct of social justice is more common. But I've been talking to colleagues in Australia and Canada, Ireland. Fairness is a term that is used constantly. And if you go to Singapore, the civil service employment deal proposition for civil servants uses the word fairness. I'm going to use another example which you may not have come across. How many of you have heard of the Second Half Centre? Okay. It was a small piece in the news that I picked up, and I thought that was a really interesting example. What this woman, okay, let me just get her name. She's Jill Shaw-Ruddick, ex-banker, but she's also founder of the Second Half Centre, which is a charity that provides services to older members of the community. So anybody above 50 is now considered old. And I know, that's very scary for me as well. Okay, so she started this wonderful center for people to drop in, do yoga, and so on. What was interesting about this news article was that she, using her contacts, persuaded organizations to donate internships to the Second Half Centre. And she then auctioned these internships. She had internships with Man Group, Net-a-Porter, Gagosian Gallery, Oppenheimer. So they were, I think, 2-week internships or something like that. Now, how much do you think an internship went for? Or how much do you think an internship is worth? Throw a figure.
You should surely get paid for an internship rather than pay for it.
No, but there was actually auctioned. It's a fundraiser for the Second Half.
How long was the internship for?
Sorry?
How long was it for?
I think the internships were about for a month, I think.
No.
Yeah.
10K?
10K? Anybody else? 20K. Okay. I think she would have loved to have you bid, because the average auction price was $5,000 for an internship. Now, somebody said that surely you should be paid for an internship rather than have to get daddy or mummy to buy you one. But there was a question here in another audience that I presented of how fair it was to have internships restricted to those who could buy them. How many of you feel that is somehow a little bit suspect? Okay, but why? You think about the revenue that, so she had about 7 internships. She made about 40,000 pounds, went directly into this charity. She didn't take a cut. And it provided revenue for running costs for this community. that would otherwise be isolated, no networking opportunities. What's so wrong about that?
The context is slightly different there, I think. So there's a reason for that money to be invested in that particular situation. But if you were to apply the same to another organisation and you were just charging for internships then you're losing a whole group of people that could potentially go for that.
So there's kind of, you think of internships in one frame, but here you're conflating quite different frames of what is fair. And another organisation that did what she did is Westminster School. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that institution. They did the same. They auctioned internships, and they got a lot less, actually. A mini pupillage with a barrister went for £700 for a week. So it's £100 a day to intern with this criminal barrister. And they managed to get interns sold or auctioned by Coutts, Porters, Fabergé. So clearly it is picking up this thing about internships being a scarce commodity that should be bought and sold. And of course, we have politicians in the fray. How many of you are Lib Dems? What is the policy on internships?
No idea.
Okay. Well, their official policy is they should be paid. But here we go. One of their esteemed colleagues has just advertised for an unpaid internship. The very week that HMRC has announced that they are beginning to investigate all companies that are offering advertising for unpaid internships or advertising for internships. So you can see that actually the way you frame something can affect the way you look at whether it's fair or unfair. And one of the things we did in the first part of this research was to map out the different kinds of frames across different academic disciplines. So we reviewed the legal literature, reviewed sociological literature, anthropological literature, philosophical literature, to see whether we could find and distill some of these frames or lenses. So this is a way that we've synthetically clustered the different frames. The different colors are what we call lenses, but within each lens we would have kind of little groupings. And I'll talk a little bit about some of these lenses so you get an idea of where these might be relevant. But in trying to cluster or organize this literature, we asked the questions where the narratives came from, what assumptions might be made within a particular discipline, and then cluster them into what we call kind of petals. Now, organizational justice is not unfamiliar to HR. It is actually the bedrock on which many of our processes rest. You talk about employee voice. How do you organize that within an organization? Engagement. How do you do performance management? You look very carefully at the components of organizational justice. You pay attention to distributed justice, where the issue is how things should be distributed with a mind to a particular outcome. You look at procedural justice, the process of allocating those resources to get that outcome, and interactional justice, which looks very much at how you frame, present, and communicate the policies and procedures that you've already decided upon. And all of these three interact to give a flavor, to shape the perception of what is fair or just within an organization. But we found that it wasn't enough, because the population, your employees, also operate in other spaces where they use other frames of fairness. They wear different hats in their lives, and sometimes when they come to you and say, I think this is unfair, they are also using other ways of measuring that fairness, which you, in just focusing on organizational justice, may not be considering. For example, socially just distribution of goods. This is largely driven by policy. So when you think of the things that politicians say, we should reform social welfare, we should punish shirkers, we should reduce health benefits to a particular group of people. It comes under this kind of economic modeling. So within that sphere, you have something like rational choice theory, which presumes that people weigh and measure the utility of choices. Or game theory. If you listen to some of the ways that the politicians talk about people who abuse the welfare system, their assumption is that these people are gaming. They are looking at the different ways in which welfare is distributed. They weigh and use the system to get maximum individual reward from the system. Banks also use it, because when they think of providing something like interest for current accounts, or credit card no interest holidays, they also assume that a certain percentage of their clients will gain, so that they never have to pay interest. So that underpins their assumption about what is fair. And of course, theories of justice, when you go into a tribunal, they will apply things like equity theory or natural justice. And these are not familiar spaces, because they're outside what we would consider organizational justice, which is the day-to-day practice of HR. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about principles of outcome. None of these lenses are what I call orthogonal. They're not exclusive to each other. As you can imagine, they slide kind of quite messily from one to another, depending on how fine a distinction you want to make in your distinction. So principles of outcome focuses on the end state. So norms of proportionality has application in, say, the discussion on executive pay, fair pay, and pay distribution within an organization. So if you apply norms of proportionality then into a discussion on executive bonuses, what happens is you are creating a discussion that caps executive bonuses at a certain level. If you read the Hutton review on low pay, what they recommended was that the median pay to your top earning executive should be no more than 20 times. Now, most private organizations, you can talk about multiples of hundreds of times from the median to the top. But if you did apply the proportionality as your fairness frame, if that was important to you, then naturally the discussion will just narrow that band. But then that comes up against tournament theory. And tournament theory argues that no, I should be paid what I bring into the business. So if I'm bringing in £100 million worth of new business every year, I expect a fair cut of it. The argument in tournament theory is that if I'm growing the pie, I should have a piece of that pie, and it benefits everybody else when all the trickle-down effect happens. So now you can see the tension between the norms of proportionality and tournament theory. And yet both are concerned with exactly what is it that you want as your outcome. And then yet again, you have another complication of luck and due desert. So if I was lucky enough, born in a situation where I went to Westminster School, where my daddy bought me an internship with Oppenheimer, and I was lucky enough to be bright. Now, who's going to get that job in the investment bank at the end of the day? What are my odds against somebody who is applying from, I don't know, Surbiton? So, is that fair? You could argue that, well, life's unfair. And if I have the money, I should have some advantage from it. Or at least, if my parents had the money, I would have that advantage. So, and this links on with capability theory. And capability theory was devised by a Nobel Prize-winning economist called Amartya Sen, together with a woman called Nussbaum. And that one talks very much to equality, questions about equality. And this has informed, say, our Equalities Act. The basis of the guidance for the Equalities Act is based on capability theory. And yet, capability theory is completely absent from the HR discourse. Capability theory argues that what you want at the end is for somebody to have choices, real choices in life. And in order to do that, you have to link up my innate capability with the access to the ways that I can develop that capability, the ability to translate opportunity into reality, and that increases my functionings, which is how Amartya Sen describes real choice. And this theory has been used to inform almost all of 20th century development and aid policy. And then there's the temporal perspective. Now, how fair is it if I burned this forest, made a lot of money from my logging activities, and left the next generation with a burnt out shell of a field? So this one talks about obligations across time. And you can see that written into state constitutions, where they say, we have the right to pursue happiness. But what they mean is across generations. It is not for now, it is your obligation to maintain and protect resources so that other people can share in the same quality of life as you had. So that makes an interpretivist perspective is actually a hodgepodge of various critical theories that question how we construct reality. If you look at a lot of the feminist literature, what they argue is that it doesn't matter how you readjust quotas. It doesn't matter if you give somebody a scholarship, because the narrative itself is patriarchal. The way the issues are framed already tilts the balance against a particular group. And if you look at also, say, post-colonial narratives, you can also see that tension, that once upon a time it was fair for colonial powers to exploit the less developed economies in the pursuance of economic growth. The post-colonial narratives question a lot of that narrative and argue that how we talk about economic globalization is tilted to the developed West. So all of these raise questions about what is fair, and in this particular part, they question the very construct of the narrative. You can see that fairness is, as you would expect, a loaded construct. It is politically linked, it's very emotive, it's very personal. And when I started this journey, my colleagues said, you're absolutely crazy to do this. It is impossible to pin down fairness. And so I took up that challenge, and we've got this framework. It is one of many ways of clustering it. Someone else might cluster it in a different way. But what we wanted to do was to cluster it in a way that was useful for organizational discourse. Why I found it important? If you think about HR theory, it is predicated on the idea of mutuality. Now, we could be very cynical about it, but what this piece of research allows the employer and the employee to do is, if you're an employer that is interested in fairness as one of your core values, there is an opportunity for you to have a discussion about what is fair in a fairly objective way. So when you agree on the particular lens or frame of fairness that your organization believes in that particular context, you can take it beyond the personal into a constructive conversation about what really is fair. But it also means that the organization, if you have breached your own frame, it is actionable.
Sorry, are you taking questions along the way or at the end?
Sorry?
Are you taking questions along the way or at the end?
Doesn't matter. I can take questions if you'd like, because this is already my last slide.
Oh, wait.
Yeah, okay, fine. So I worked with an illustrator during my own journey of trying to come to grips with fairness. And I wanted to capture the fact that in managing people, for HR, for the profession, for people managers in organization, there are lots of drivers of change. We've looked a little bit at that with the example of internships and in the example of corporate tax. Those drivers are not outside your domain. They are shaking the very ground on which you practice your practices, your professional practice. And traditionally, compliance would have been very, very easy. We know exactly which ball to juggle, how high to throw it, when to roll with it. But with those things coming into play, with those challenges about what is fair, what is just within organizations, I would argue that having in your kind of equipment different fairness lenses gives you a different way of looking at the employment deal. It also gives the employee an opportunity to voice something that you may otherwise not capture. Thank you.